We'll do a review in the Likkutei Sichos in Chelik Chof Test. This is the second sichah for the Parshas Tovai. The Rebbe explains a Rambam. It's a Lomdish sichah, and in the Rambam, it seems that it's talking about the fact that the stones that you build need to be complete, need to be whole. If you're building the mizbeach and you're building the ramp to the mizbeach and also the other parts, they need to be avonim shlemis, not blemished. And we'll see about the shear of how much is blemished. But the Rambam seems to only apply this shear when you built it. You can't build with these stones that have a blemish. But what happens if it gets a blemish after it's already built? So while the blemish needs to be replaced, those stones, but the shear doesn't mention it. The Rebbe will be machadish that over there it's actually a smaller shear. It's a mashavu, it's any amount. The Rebbe explains that before you're building, you have a commandment what type of stones to use to build it. And therefore there is a shear for that. But after it's built, it has kedusha. If you're blemishing it any amount, that would be something which is taking something to kedusha, and any amount would be posla. The Rebbe will be meinach and explain this beautifully. We'll go step by step. Tovei base. Ois Aleph. In Hilchas Beis HaBechira, this is in the laws of the chosen house, the laws of the Beis HaMikdash in the Rambam. Zog the Rambam says as follows, that Kol Even Shenivgemo, if a stone that has a pagam, has a blemish, that has been blemished, and what is the shear of a blemish? Kidei shetachgur bo hatzipoiden kisakin shel shchito. By a knife that you have to shecht, it has to be smooth. The shear is that if there is a blemish in the knife, in the shchita, in the chalaf, enough that if you put your nail, it wraps around, meaning it stops over there. Exactly what the shear is, that'll be also mentioned later on in the sichah. But nevertheless, whatever exactly that shear is, there is a shear that any stone, just like tachgur bo hatzipoidim, when the nail sort of wraps it, which it stops by it just can't smoothly go through. That same shear applies to any stone that has been blemished. If it has such a blemish that if you put through your nail over it, the nail would stop over there, will be then that's possible. Harizu psula lekevesh ulemizbeach. So for the ramp and for the mizbeach, that is no good because the posuk shenemar, the posuk says avonim shleimus tivne as mizbeach Hashem. Whole stones you shall build the altar for Hashem. So the mizbeach, we have a very clear posuk. To build the mizbeach, we need to have whole stones. And what is the shear, the Rambam says, that makes it not whole? Tachgur bo hatzipoinen. That makes the stone not whole. And therefore, a stone like that is not fit to use to build the mizbeach or the ramp on the mizbeach. And we have a pasuk, avonim shleimus tivnes mizbach habayit. Now, the Rambam concludes this halacha, führt euch the halacha, and he concludes the halacha, v'chein avnei ha-heichal v'ha'azoris shaleimos hoyu. The same thing is the stones that not for the mizbech. That's for the actual structure, the Heichal. That was the rooms. So the stones that they used for the Heichal, and also the stones that they used for the courtyards, v'ha'azoris. Shleimus hoyu, they were also whole. Now, strikingly, the Rambam doesn't say here how much the shear is, and the Rambam brings a posik for the mizbeach. It says avonim shleimus. We don't have tivnes mizbech Hashem. We don't have a special posik. The Rambam doesn't bring a posik over here. But the Rambam just says the same thing is true for the stones of the Heichal and the Azorah. They need to be whole. And one would assume, as the Rebbe will elaborate now, that what is considered whole, the same like we say by the Mizbech. Those stones need to be in such a level that you can't, your fingernail, if you pass through there, it won't stop it, not be tachgir ba'atzipoidim. So that's the same shear one would think by the Avna Heichal and the Azores. All the stones that you built, not only the Mizbeach, also need to be without this blemish. How do we know this? What's the pasuk for this? So we'll actually see soon that some Meforshim argued that actually, since the Rambam doesn't bring a pasuk, and the pasuk the Rambam brings, this has a different shear. So we'll see in a minute, because our main discussion will involve around what happens after it was already built, which is going to be in the further halacha. The Noch zog the Rambam. Then the Rambam says, he's talking again about the Avnei Heichal va'azoris. These stones, the Rambam said that they too need to be shleimus. So what happens? The stones of the Heichal and the Azoris, shenifgemu, oy shenigmemu, either they were blemished or not sure exactly what the type of nigmemu, but it's another expression of they were damaged a little bit. Psulin, they are puzzled. So which means before we were talking about building them. Now we're talking about they were already built. And if they were blemished or became defected, psulin, they become disqualified. Ve'ein lahem pidyon, you can't redeem them, chulu, etc. You have to remove it, you have to replace it. Okay. So he starts off with the kevesh and the mizbeach, goes to the rest, Avneichel v'Azoris, and he talks about what happens if after you built it, they get nifgemu or nifgemu. When there's them after he finishes about the Azoris and the Avnei Heichal, there's them zokter dem din from begimma b'mizbeach lachar shenivnes. What is the halacha in the blemish in the mizbeach after lachar shenivnes, after it was built? The first halacha, we're talking about what kind of stones can you use to build it. And then later on, he will talk what happens in the stones that they were built with, and then they beget a blemish. What's the halacha there? So first, the Rebbe, before the Rebbe gets to the blemished stones of the Mizbeach, the Rebbe first clarifies what's the din with the blemish, with stones that we can't use for the Heichal Nazorah. So again, some people assume, some commentators believe that the shear is the same. It's Kadesha Tachgabatzipaidim. But some believe no, that because the Rambam splits it up and it says V'chein and that, we'll see over here there's a different shear. The Rambam doesn't say. The Pashtus Letterman, simply one would learn as ba'avnei heichel va'azoris shenivgimu, that what is the amount if they were already built in the heichel and the azoris and those stones were blemished. is the shiur hapegima oich. So what is the amount of a blemish? Also kadesha tachger bo hatzipoinim. Also so that the nail would be tachger. Punkt wie der erste halacha by Evan Shenigma, the same thing. Stones that you can't use for the building in the Chatchila. So by Evan Shenivgema, what is the shear of the pagam? What's the shear of the blemish? So bepashtus, when the Rambam says that after they were built and they have a pagam, it's possible the same shear. Punkt in der erste Halacha bei Evan Shenigma, was ist possible Libinyan, HaKevesh v'hamizbeach. Und das, wo der Rambam sagt nicht dem Shir in der Halacha. So why does the Rambam not say what the amount is in this Halacha? Is as weil es kommt behemshach zu der frierdike Halacha, because this is as a continuation of the previous Halacha. The Mele is nicht nötig zu überchazen dem Shir takef nachamol, therefore it's not important to repeat again the amount immediately afterwards. The Rambam told you what a pagam is to build, that it's Kedesh Tachger Atzipoidim. So when he tells you that after building it became a pagam, you know yourself that it's Kedesh Tachger Atzipoidim. But the Rebbe says, not so pashut according to all the Farshim. Because even in the first halacha we learned, what is the shiur of the Heichal and the Azorah? Is it the same shiur nivgema or not? Siz aber do mefarshim, but there is mefarshim was zayne medayik nitazeh. Other mefarshim learn and they derive not this way, that it's not the same shiur. For them was by the Avnei Heichal v'ha'azoris. In the very back to the first halacha, when the Rambam mentions the stone of the Heichal Azoris, zog the Rambam nor shleimus hoyu, he says they were whole. He doesn't say that you can't have a pagam just shleimus hoyu. Und zog nit in der halacha shel achrizah. And also in this halacha that the pagam happens, them shir from chagiras hatzipoinen doesn't say the amount that the shir is chagiras hatzipoinen. Ubereish dvora schreibt in meforish, and in the beginning of the Rambam, he writes very clearly. He seems to emphasize that this shir is only when you're building it. As the shir pegimo be'even kidei shetachger chulu. Pasal nor the keves mizbech, that it only disqualifies the keves mizbech. Doesn't say everything. It says v'chein. So first he learns keves mizbech, and then he adds to it v'chein, to also the other Heichal and the Azores. So he says is muchach. So that proves to us, as by they is the shir nit verbunden mit chagiras hatzipoiden. By them, the shir is not connected to the chagiras tzver. It's a different shir. So the mefarshim learn that it's something different, because first the Rambam says chagiras hatzipoiden, and after that, in both halachas, the Rambam seems to imply that that shir chagiras hatzipoiden is only to build it. But after the shir for Eicholos and Azores, and what would the shir of the begima after they were built, the Rambam must have a different shir. And they actually bring evidence for that. They bring a raya from this, that you can't say that a pagam kidei chagiras hatzipoiden would passel by the Heichal and the Azorah. The Heichal and the Azorah were built from stone that have a pagam, because we learned in the Gemara they used the shamir. The shamir was a worm that they would make a mark and that would crack the stone. And that cracking of the stone left a blemish. It was impossible not to leave a blemish. And yet that's what they used to build the Beis HaMikdash. So you see clearly that blemished Heichal can't do it for the Mizbeach. They didn't use the Shamir for the Mizbeach, but they did use the Shamir for the rest of the Heichal and the Azoris. And that means that for Heichal and Azoris, it doesn't matter, and we don't have the Shir Kedei Chagiras Seperim. They bring evidence for this. By the Avnei Beis Hamikdash state mefarish, by the stones of the Beis Hamikdash, it's very clearly Azei Zainen Oizgehag geworden durch Hashamir, that they were carved out through Hashamir. Und in Toysus is mevuer, and Toysus explains, as durch Hashamir kennen die Avonim nit herauskommen in ganzen glatt. It's impossible for them to come out totally smoothly. As in Zezel, I feel in the Zaynke begimmer, they shouldn't even have a blemish. That's not possible. Not possible with the Shamir. And therefore they built them. So therefore the Rambam doesn't mean that if they have a blemish, they can't mean it. That's the explanation of some of the Meforshim. Far we have what the Rebbe is saying, that while we would be tempted to say that the building of the Heichal and the blemishes all have Kadesha Tachgerat Sipoiren, and because that's the shear, and the Rambam says V'chein, but the fact that the Rambam emphasized in the very beginning, and he singles out, and he says Tachgerat Sipoiren is for the Mizbech and the Kevis, and it doesn't include everything. And the second halacha, when he says that if it happens a blemish, the Rambam does not mention that all Tachgerat Sipoiren, they say that it means it's a bigger shear over there. And the Rebbe brings down from Toshus and the Gemara, where it says that the Shamir carved out, and that definitely left a blemish, and still that we used it, is a siman that for the Beis HaMikdash, we don't have the shear, Kadesh Tachgerat Sipoiren, it's a bigger shear. Okay, but the main issue that the Rebbe is going to deal now, what is the shear for the blemish of the Mizbeach after it was built? And especially according to the second opinion that we learned now, which the second opinion that Rebbe quotes is from the Maim Chaim and the Pri Chodesh. So the Pri Chodesh, the way we learned now from the Pri Chodesh, it's definitely, we have now a different shear. According to the Pri Chodesh, we start over with Chaguris HaTzipoiren, and then he says that the Mizbeach, the clay, the Heichal, and the Azoris, whether it's building it or whether they were blemished, gets another shear. So now that we're following up with the halacha of what happens to the Mizbeach and the Kevis that were blemished, can't say that, oh, it's the same shear as before, because there's an interruption of shiurim over here. And the Rambam doesn't mention it. So what is the shear? And this is going to be the crux, the idea that the Rebbe is trying to resolve over here. Base. Noch die zwei halachas anal, after these two above halachas, ula'achere was zog dem din von even shenoga ba habarzel v'habayna. He also talks about the halacha of a stone that was touched by a metal. The post says kicharbecho, he naftla vet chalalo, you can't use it. So zog the Rambam ba'alocha b'fnei atzmi. Then the Rambam gives its own halacha. Not as a emphasis here, its own halacha. It's before we were talking about building, and now he's talking about what happens after it was built. So it says in its own halacha, even shenivgama, if there was a stone that became blemished after it was built in the mizbech, or shenoga babarzel, or there was a metal touched a stone of the mizbeach achar shenivnis b'mizbeach oy b'kevesh, after it was built into the mizbeach or in the ramp, oy so'evim psulo, that stone which was blemished or touched by the metal is possible. Vashak ksher is the rest of the discussion. Now, question becomes, how much is the shir of pegima over here? If the shir of pegima would be Kiddush Target Tzipoidan, the Rambam should have said something. Because there was already, especially according to the first, there was already interruption from other shir. Der Fun was the Rambam. Zogt euch don nit kein shir. The fact that the Rambam doesn't say here either, like in the previous halacha, by the Heichal and the Azores, it doesn't give a shir. Ubefrat as there is maspsik mit, especially that he is interrupting with Abnei Heichal v'Azores shenivgamu chulu, and he interrupts with the stone of the Heichal Azorah that were blemished, which we said before have a different shear. According to these above mefarshim, according to the Pri Chodesh, Bazei is the shir peguma anders v'frier. They have a different shir. It's not the same as in the first halacha, Kadesh Tachker Tzipoidan. They say it's a difference, a bigger shir. Is mashmaz oich by even mizbeach la'achar shenimnis b'mizbeach. So it's mashma. It appears that also the stone of the mizbeach after it was built into mizbeach is their shir pegima nidar zelba. It's not the same, because there's no consistent shir pegima kadesh tachker tzipoidan. So why would this be the shir? Now, one can argue, we already told you what the shir to build it, Kadesh Tachger Tzipoidan. And now that it's blemished, it's probably the same shir. Even though simply one would need to assume, should accept Asis der selbe shir mit der erster gebrachter halacha, that this is the same amount, the same shir as in the first brought down halacha. But the Rambam zog dem shir. The Rambam says the shir called Even shenifkema kidei shetachger chulu psulo lekevesh v'lemizbeach. So we already have a shir for a pgam. So the Rambam says that if it has a pgam, in order for this nail tachger, that's the shir. So now that we're saying, and that's post kavesh mizbeach. So now that we're saying that if it's already been built, the same shear. So, but we can say no. That would be the simple approach, the first approach. But still, the Rebbe says no. As a zidoach chilik, zwischen de avonim v'zeshtein lebinyan hamizbeach v'la'achrei shenivno. There is a big difference. There's a difference here between stones that you want to use for the mizbeach, or they were already built and they are already a mizbeach. There's a big difference here. Bald as der psul from pegima werd abgelernt. This disqualification of pegima in the beginning of the Rambam, that the Rambam says you can't build it. You can't build it with those stones. But the Rambam brings from Posik, Abonim Shleimus Tivnes Mizbech Hashem, that the building of the Mizbech of Hashem needs to be done with whole stones, not blemished. So what is that talking about? What you need to build it of. Is Yesh Mokum Leimar. So there is therefore room to say, as achar shenivne hamizbeach is der shir hapegima nidar zober, that this amount of the blemish after the mizbeach was built is not the same. And the Rebbe will say it's a smaller shir here. Now, the Rebbe wants to be machadish takid at the end of the sichah that the pegima after is a kolshu even less than chagiris atzipoidim, even less of a shir. But before the Rebbe is going to be machadish chidushim, the Rebbe says you should know take that in the Gemara it very clearly says that even after the mizbech, or clearly it's mashma in the Gemara, that the mizbech, even after it was built, what is the shiur that would passel the stone on the mizbech, kidei chagiras atzipoiden, just like what you're not allowed to build in the pagam. But in the Rambam, the Rebbe says it's mashma not like that. Estakas in Gemara state the shiur kidei shetachger ba'atzipoiden. Let it be true that the Gemara uses the shir kedeshtachger b'tzporim not only in the building, but legabe pegimas hamizbeach. What would blemish the mizbeach, which is not talking about how to build the mizbeach, it's talking about it was a mizbeach. So the Gemara seems pretty clear. Was bepashtus retzich vek the avne hamizbeach la'afnach reish divnu ba'mizbeach. Simply talking about this, we're talking about the stones of the mizbeach after they were already built into the mizbeach. So that's in the Gemara. So there is no issue that the Gemara shiur is today chagiras hatzipoiden even after they were built in, because the Gemara says begimas hamizbech is kidei chagiras hatzipoiden. But the Rebbe says the fact that in the Gemara it's very clear, and the Rambam changes from the Gemara, he brings the Gemara, but he brings it differently. That itself points to that the Rambam has a different view. But for them, Gufa, from this itself, was the Rambam is the Mishane for Loshen HaGemara. The fact that the Rambam changes, it does not bring down this language of the Gemara about the Begimas HaMizbeach. Although, generally speaking, he quotes the laws of the Gemara in their shape and the language. He uses the language of the Gemara. But here, unzok dem shir von pesul pegima, and he does say the disqualification of the blemish, kedei shetachir ba'atzipoin, this shir, that tachir ba'atzipoin, dafki b'shaychas lebinyan, hakevesh v'amizbeach, to building the ramp and the mizbeach, Apia Posik, and based on the Posik, everything emphasizes that it's the building that gives us that shir as Mizrach Hashem. Hat nicht ausgestellt the dinim be'ofen, and then he didn't set up the halachas in a way as the shir for chagiras hatzipoiden, so keilu sein befedish, that set it up that the shir, that this chagiras hatzipoiden should also very clearly include also the stones after they were built in the mizbech, as in the Gemara, that chagiras hatzipoiden, the Rambam fails to include that. Is mashma, so therefore it appears as by the avonim is the shir l'das Rambam. By these avonim, the shir, according to Rambam's opinion, nit kidei shetachger bo as tzipoiden, it's not in order tachger bo as tzipoiden, that shir. There's a different shir. So then again, the Rebbe points out that while in the Gemara it's very clear, or the mashmoes is that the shir of the shetachger tzipoiden applies also once it was built. But in the Rambam, the fact that Rambam doesn't quote the Gemara like he usually does, and he writes it differently, and the writing seems to imply that only for the building we have these extra restrictions. So that's why it seems like the Rambam holds that this does not apply after it was built. But what is the shir? As the Rebbe will continue to discuss. In Ois Gimel, the Rebbe will continue to question. So where is another shir from? We have only one pasuk, which talks about Tivneh, and over there is Chaguras Hatzipoiden. So how could we have another shir? And what would be the pasuk? What would be the other reason for the other shir? Let's look inside. Gimel. Es ist aber schwer zu annehmen Chiluk Hanal b'das Rambam, the above distinction in the opinion of the Rambam that there is a different shiur for building the stones, and then what happens when they're already built in, it's difficult. As avonim shleimas tivne gate nor ev avonim lebinyan hamizbech. The new stones, whole stones, you should build is only when you're building, and therefore it doesn't apply to the stones that have already been built. Warum der Rambam bringt doch nicht kein anderer Limud auf dem Psul von an Eben shenivgemo achar shenimnis b'mizbeach. Because the Rambam brings no other place from where to learn that it would be this, that if it was nivgam after the mizbeach, after it was built. So we're saying that when you built it, that's the shir chagiras tzupayer. But there's no other pasuk over here to teach us. So where do we get the difference from? Now the Rebbe says Takir. The Rambam does bring another pasuk. The Rambam brings down as oif di avne mizbeach la'achar shenivnu b'mizbeach, that those stones after they were built in the mizbeach, the Rambam says hot mataka another limud. We have something else from where we learn it. Because the pasuk in Yisro it says mizbach adoma tasali v'zovachta olov es oilesecha v'es shlomecha, and you will shecht on it your oiles and the shlomim. We don't shecht on the mizbeach. You shecht next to the mizbeach. You bring the blood on the mizbeach. Why does the pasuk say mizvachta olov v'chi olov ata zaveach? Do you then shecht on top of the mizbeach? What is the olov? Mizvachta olov means on him when it's whole. Elosh bizman shu sholem v'le bizman shu choser. You should shecht on him. On him means that the mizbeach needs to be olov, needs to be complete, not choser. It's a separate pasuk from the pasuk of Avan Shleimus. This is a pasuk once the mizbeach is built. Ubil Shoinen, to use the lashon of the Ramban, that from the pasuk that you have to build, we only know that building you have to be whole stone. We don't know that once you built it, that it can't have a blemish. So therefore, he learns it from mizvach to olov. The Avonim Shleimus, if you would just have the pasuk of Avonim Shleimus, that would be when it says Tivne, when you're building it. Kach nemar olov. That's why the pasuk here says Zavachta olov, that it needs to be olov on him. It needs to be a full mizbeach, no blemish. So the Rambam has a different. We can say that there's a different shir here, but the Rambam do. Bilchus beis abchira. Let him test nitop from yana pasuk. He does not learn from that pasuk. So therefore, we need to say canal, as we said before, as that also with regards to the stones after they were built in mizbeach. How do we know b'chlal that there's a pagam over there? Is the mocker from psul pegima from a pasuk avonim shleimus tivnas mizbech habayit? It must be that pasuk. We don't have another pasuk. So when the pasuk says you have to build it, it also would include that after it's built, if it's blemished, it's no good. What's that bring in the Friedrich Halach? It brings the Friedrich in the previous Halach. Aha. So if the whole place that we know that once it was built, it's still going to be a problem with pogum, comes from the pasuk avonim shleimus, how could we have a different shear? So then it should have the same shear. How good is it? Vadrukush ledochta. Avozok ni der Rambam do dem shira nal even shenif gemok shir. Ze okay, it's about that to tell us that it was that shear. Was the funis mashma do is nit der selbe shear. It's not the same shear. So what's the source then? There is no other source. So we have to connect it to avonim shleimus. Avonim shleimus we know is Kadesh Tachgir Tzipoirim. Over here, the Rambam clearly does not say Kadesh Tachgir Tzipoirim, does not include it. So it means it's another shear. It's another shear. How could it be another shear if it's all based on the same pasuk? So that's the difficulty we have. What is the shear after it was built according to the Rambam, which the Rambam implies that it's not the same shear. When we don't have a pasuk, it's difficult to say because we don't have anything else to say that it's something different than that same pasuk we learn out l'chatchila. The Rebbe comes up here with a gewaldike chiddush. There's another source in the Rambam, and there's another issue. Besides the avonim shleimus, there's an issue of desecrating stones of the mizbech. Now, even if you, as the Rebbe will explain, even if you don't do it in a way of destruction and everything else, there's a whole new question here. Destroying or part of the mizbech that is destroyed has a problem. That would be even a kosher, would be even less. And that's separate from the avonim shleimus. Dalit. So Yashlema, we can say דיני Yedua, it's known as oich in dem shir kedei shetachger ba tziporim. What exactly is the shir kedei shetachger ba tziporim? The Rebbe wants to say that ketachger ba tziporim is not kosher. It's a very small shear, but some say it is very small shear, but it's still a shear. Where kosher means no shear, any shear. And that's going to be the chiddush after it was built. The דיני Yedua as oich in dem shir kedei shetachger ba tziporim benegeya sakin shel shchita. When we talk about a knife of shchita, how much is that shear that the tziporim is tachger? Is da shakla v'tariya v'deyas? There's a debate, the different opinions. In them goyed lashir, how big the shear is. This as yesh, even if some say the shir from chagiras at tziporim meant afilu abigim kolshu. They say that it even means that it's any amount. But yet, the Rebbe says, even according to that opinion, those opinions, it's not any amount because we're saying this is an amount of chagiras at tziporim. And the Rebbe is going to learn that the amount for Begima after the Mizbech was built is taka kosher. But I feel Likkutei is even according to this opinion, which make a very small blemish. Kedei shech means even a very small blemish. For Zayin Mefarish and Rambam, they explain the Rambam. This is the shear. Hachikotten that this is the smallest shear, which is a kosher, any amount. Alpha became, but yeah, the fun was the Rambam zog the nidam loshen kosher. The fact that the Rambam does not use the language any amount kosher, ukiitzu are similar to it. Nor kidei shetachger boyat tziporim kisaken shel shchita. He says like tachger boyat tziporim, he gives an amount like the knife of shchita. Is moving as though meant the Rambam medaik zayin. The Rambam means to specifically tell us ados hot ashir mesuyam. It does have a certain amount. So, of course, according to those who it's not a kosher, for sure it's a shear. But the Rebbe is explaining, even if we're saying that it's any amount, why would the Rambam not say kosher? Why does it say kedei shetachger tziporim? It means to say that there is a shear. So the Rebbe explains that there's two really ideas of a kosher. Why is the Rambam saying that this have a shear, a special shear? Because even in kosher, whether we say any amount, that amount is the any amount, or it's no amount. And let's see, it's going to be a fine difference here. Shleimer das Borobas, we can say the explanation is the sheer kosher gefit in the Rambam come upon. We find many times in the Rambam the sheer of any amount kosher, whatever it is. As it says, yain shenisnasach la'akul, if wine that was libation for avodah zarah, osur bahanoya, it's osur to benefit. Vashoisim imenu kosher, any amount like it. The same thing is if you eat anything that was offered for avodah zarah, whether it's meat or it's fruit, even if it's water or salt, one who eats any amount is like it. Uses the word kolshu. The Rambam says the law of avodah zarah, the avodah zarah, ulegabe shlal for the Iran Dachas. That anything to eat from it, anything to benefit from it, kolshu, kolshu, kolshu. The Ragat Shover. Is most of the time from Rambam Hilchos Shabbos. He adds another reference, Hilchos Shabbos with Loshen kolshu. Was dorten bringt der Rambam kama dvorim, wo der Isur Hitzor Shalahem is bekolshu. Over there, the Rambam says, usually carrying requires a certain amount. You won't be chayiv something not important if you carry on Shabbos in the Rishus Sarabim or Rishus Sarabim. It won't consider if it's not Dover Choshu. But there are several things that the Rambam says is bekolshu, any amount you carry. Now, these kolshu, the Rebbe says, are not the same, even though they're saying words kolshu. They're different. But l'chayra, there is a difference between them. What it's meant by the kolshu. A small amount kolshu or no amount. As they gather isur kolshu kemalen. We can say how to define kolshu. We can learn it two ways. Aleph, number one, ados ashir in the mashtimtun isur. That becomes a measure in that specific prohibition. We have different measures. The shear is by dried by fig, Bekizayis, an olive, Unoicha Zelche, was einen shear ha'asir isur kolshu. Is bekolshu. It's a shear. There's one isur, different shiurim, and one shear is kolshu. That's one way. Beis is an isur she'en shear. There is no shear here. When the far is the isur bekolshu, nit beged the shear. And that's why any amount is also, not because that becomes the shear. There's no shearing. And this is the difference between avodah zarah and Shabbos. Hey, und das ist der Chiluk von Geder Kolshu bei Isur Hitzor b'Shabbos und Kolshu in Isur avodah zarah. The Kolshu, when we talk about the prohibition of carrying on Shabbos, and Kolshu when we talk about Isur avodah zarah. B'negei Hitzor b'Shabbos, was Isur Hitzor hod v'derech klal ashir. You're not going to carry on Shabbos, but normally you need a shear, what you're chai when you're carrying it. Is moving as odi dvorim vos isuram is bekolshu. So it's understood. Why is it also bekolshu? It's not because there's no shear. It's as the far was bazei is kolshu ashir, because that becomes the shear. Any amount becomes their shear. Tzival oich kolshu from the dvorim is choshu mitzadasmo. Whether it's because even any amount of these matters is important. Valderech pilpul kolshu, say the peppers, any amount. Itran kolshu, so a good smell. Rechtei kolshu v'kulu. The good smell, the bad smell, but any amount over there is important because small amounts are important. They give off a smell or they make things sharp. So any amount accomplishes that. Other the farvas matznei know some ligniza, or because people hide them, they put them away to keep them. So that means that the land importance them. The people make it important. They're hiding and they're making these things, even though it's just a small amount. as opposed to when we talk about the Nidachas, and similarly, Avodah in general. Over there, Kolshu is not a shear in Iran Nidachas or Avodah Zorah. Was if them state the pasuk says nothing should paste your hands at all. Mu'uma, nothing from the ched. Is the issue from Kolshu need the far? So the prohibition of an amount, not because was Kolshu is together from shear. It's not because that's an amount. Nor by Isur Avodah Zorah is nitokin shear. Mu'uma. There is no shear there. It's not that there's a small shear. It's a Kolshu shear, but there's no shear in Mu'uma. Rambam, to use the Lashon of Rambam. Since this is because of Akum, ain't no shear. There is no shear. Nothing should come to you from the ched. So the Rebbe explains there's two levels of kolshu. One, that the shear and that isur is a kolshu, like by the isur etzoi of Shabbos. So even though the Ragachover is mitzayin, the Rebbe says a difference because the isur Shabbos is Avodah Zorah. But Avodah Zorah, the Torah doesn't allow anything. So even a non-shear is prohibited because mu'uma. So that kolshu is a non-shear. And the Rebbe wants to now associate that this halacha, after the building was built, after Mizbech was built, that the pagam is also going to be a kolshu. Now, the Rebbe introduces this, that the Rambam doesn't bring new halachas. We can also explain according to this the words of the Rambam, laws beisabchira ubagdim, because we're connecting it to Avodah Zorah, and Avodah Zorah has no shear, and the pagam the Rebbe will associate to the Yisur of Avodah Zorah, and the pagam in the Mizbech also has a connection to that, as the Rebbe explains. Since you do as is nit darkish or Rambam to zogen beferish דיני muchadosh. Rambam doesn't normally come up with new halachas. Milvad di mekoimes, with the exception in those places where zokt v'yirali, it appears to me. Was megifin say Rambam and Misper Mitzumzum in a very limited number of places. The Rambam will say v'yirali ki yotzim min haklal. Those are exceptions. But normally the Rambam doesn't bring down halachas. Aber b'kama mekoimes, what he does do is a meshana l'shoinu mesada dvora b'eifim gazeh. He changes the languages and he organizes words in such a way as we can for the maros nachidush within proti, that you can learn out a novelty in a specific halacha. So the Rebbe wants to learn from the Rambam's words here a novelty and halacha, even though the way he set it up, even though normally the Rambam would not do and teach us halacha that he didn't find in the Gemara. Similarly, we can say in our case. Mit dem, was der Rambam is medayik zu sagen dem Shir from Begima Sa'even. The Rambam is precisely saying to you, the Shir, how much is the blemishing of the stone that you can't use to build, and he says this Shir, dafke benedele binyan Evan, b'mizbech b'kevesh, dafke with regards to building a stone in the mizbech b'kevesh. And there's Shas, he changes it from the Gemara, which is also by after it's built, Kinal, as we read earlier. By Achar Shenivnis, and then when the Rambam comes to the Halacha to reveal B'mizbech, isn't it Moisif Even Shenivgim Akshir? It doesn't say that it was blemished the Shir Kadesh Tagetzepoy. That's one thing. So there's the change is implying here. The Rebbe is going to come over a chiddush, but the Rebbe wants to base it, even though the Rambam doesn't come chiddushim, basing that we see clearly from the change of the Rambam. The Rambam does these things. That also the fact that he places in between these two halachas, so he brings in the din from Abne Heichal v'Azorah the laws of the dinim of the stones of the Heichal Azores. Is a maramezu madgish, so this hints and he emphasizes, as by Evan that a stone that has been blemished after it was built in Mizbeach, Kommt zu noch a Psul. There's an additional disqualification. Was ist nicht verbunden mit dem Shir, which is not connected to Shir. He specifically changes it that there's a new Shir. Nor the Psul is Bekol Shuhu, Begidre Kol Shukinam. But the Psul is any amount as defined in Kol Shukinam. So why after you built, there's also a Psul of a Kol Shu Psul? What's the reason for this distinction? And in the beginning, when you built, it needs to be Kiddush Tachber, and here it's a non-sheer Kol Shu anything. So what's the reason? The Rambam sagt in Hilchos Beis HaBchira, in the Halacha Shel Achar, the Rambam says in Beis HaBchira, in the laws that follows, Anoitzitz Even Achas Min HaMizbeach, one who breaks or knocks out even one stone from the Mizbeach. Between the main room and the Mizbeach, derech hashchos, in a way of destruction, loike would get malchus. Shenamar, when they touch the Mizbeach, that the Mizbeach of the goyim, the Avirzor, you should break apart. Don't do so. It's a lav. You're going to get malchus for doing so. Lashem Alekechem. The Mizbeach, when it's broken up, that's a lav. Bald, as der Isur is verbunden und kommt die Keshel Avedesora. And since this Isur is a breaking, is tied, and it's comes in association of Avedesora, that you can't break the Mizbeach, because that's done for the goyim. They break their stuff, but not the mizbeach. With the Rambam is matkish nilchus eidat Torah. The Rebbe will say that even any amount, because it comes, it's the opposite of Vedazora. With the Rambam is matkish nilchus eidat Torah. The Rambam emphasizes in the laws of Yisrael Torah, hasoyser apilu even achas derech hashchosu min hamizbech. One who would destroy even only one stone in a way of destruction from the Mizbech or min Heichal, or from the room. So the rest of the Zohar loikesh nemar mavedus kechovim, because mavedus kechovim kes mizbechosim tetoitzum uksiv loisas again Hashem alekechem. So there is a lav that you do this to the goyim mavedus kechovim, don't do this to Hashem. So since it comes that you can't do what you do for the Zohar, you can't do for Hashem, it's based on the Isra of Avodah Zorah, kumtois, and the Isra is chal, oichven, and is noitzitz, afilu kolshu. The prohibition will apply even if you're only breaking any amount, even one small amount from one stone. Noitzitz kolshu, what does it mean you break a kolshu? Is hainu pegim. That means that you're blemishing it. That would be a kolshu. Any amount that you would be derech hashchose, that you would go any stone, even any amount, you would be, because it comes from the isur, that what you do to the goyim, and you're not allowed to do it to the Eibishter, to the Mizbeach, or the other areas in the Beis Hamikdash. Unnetes kolshu is eine pogum. Afilu kolshu. Wie steht in Rechayim, and also, so why does it say only one stone? Shalom b'diuk even achas. It's not only specifically says the Rechayim that you were noticed one stone, but if by breaking you make a mark in the building, which would be a kolshu, then you're going to be chayiv. So here the Rebbe is machadish that the there's a whole new answer here which is connected to the issue of blemishing the mizbech. Now, of course, everybody is thinking, well, the guy is not doing it b'kavona hashchosa. The Rebbe will address it soon, but that's becomes part of the shiur. The shiur is a kol shu, because that's the opposite of lesas and kain lashem lekechem. What you do to the ovid kechavim, to that eibishter, you're not allowed to even do even anything, like the Rabbi Chaim says. The Rebbe says, Vov, now we understand. There's a big chiluk. Before you built it, then you have to build it with stones. And once it's built, it's already a mizbeach. Then it becomes ashchosa. Then you can't even do kolshu. Zayin, Balpizeh is moving der chiluk zwischen even shenivgemo farn angebuit werden mizbeach und keves. The difference between a stone that was blemished before it has been built into the mizbeach and keves, what you can take. And then after it's already been built in to the mizbeach and mikeves. And that psul from Eben Shenivgemo Koidma Binyan is mitzadem tzivui v'chiyuv avonim shleimus tivna es mizbach Hashem. The obligation, and that's why an Eben Shenivgemo, before you built it, is because of the obligation that you need to build all stones. That's the way you built it. It's nothing. It's not a mizbeach yet. That's the way to build it. As the avonim darf sein shleimus, the stones need to be whole by the bnei at the time that you're building it. When the far is dos hashir in der begima, and that's why there is a shear. There's an amount. How much to blemish? What is called shleimus? Ados soll sein genug zu verrechnen werden v'chisoren v'kilkel and shleimus even. That amount, that's considered lacking, that the stone is not whole. And the shear is the shchita is that the tzipoiden gets cut up like by the sak shchita. As opposed to the stone that is blemished after it was built in the mizbeach. Wie bald dors rirt on the minyan fun Lashem Elikecho. Now it's touching God, your God. It's a mizbech already for God. It's his mizbech Hashem. It's become already mizbech. Is dus verbunden nicht nur mit dem Chiv von Avonu Shleimus Tivnes mizbech Hashem. Then it's tied not only with the obligation of you need to build whole stone the mizbech Hashem, nor euch mit dem Gather from the Titzes HaMizbech. Now this is also defined by not to break up the mizbech. Was is verbunden mit Loisasen came. That's connected to not to do so. Vitzu mizbech davei de zora, lashem alekecha. Don't do it like you do to avei zora, lashem alekecha. That you're not allowed to do any amount. Ubemela. Es geschehen wie bei avei de zora is der isur bekolshu. Just like by avei de zora, any amount of avei de zora, the isur is any amount. Nit ageder shirkinal. There's no amount over there. Al derech says the beginner in Eben Shenivnes b'mizbeach nit begeder shir. So also the blemish in the stone that is built in mizbeach, it's not a shir. I'm feeling it a shir achikot, not even the smallest amount of a shir. Kedesh shadachka b'hatzipoiden. That the nail, I feel it like the deis, as it's a kolshu, even if we say it's a kolshu, but it's a shear. It doesn't even have that shear. It's no shear. But Evan shenivgema stam onkin shear. Rambam says it was nivgema without a shear. Is also Evan psulo. That becomes possible. So now the Rebbe is also going to. So the Rebbe says the Rambam doesn't write an amount. It's not because he doesn't write an amount. There's a smaller amount, the same amount before. We can't say that Rebbe. It is because there is really no amount, any amount. And the Rebbe adds now also in the previous Alchab. But the stones of the Heichal and the Azores that become blemished. It's not the far was shir pegimosom is gresser. It's not because they have a bigger shear then talking about Tzipoin Kinal Sif Aleph, like we said in Sif Aleph, that it's a bigger shear. And mashma also in the Rambam, like from the from the Posik, so macht all of it should be a shalom. But Rav Sif Aleph, the Rebbe said that it's mashma that you need a big shear Adrabe. The Baldas, the Abonim seine geworden nachhilik von Heichal Vazoris, since they became part of the Heichal Vazoris, is the Beisu Begima need to get a shear nor Bekolshu. The Begima doesn't have a shear but any amount. Now, what are we saying? So does it mean that any amount that a person destroys? So two things. First of all, destruction needs a shear. And also, this is not destruction. This is a blemish that happened to it. The lava malchus from the Titzes Evan is gesagt geworden, davke bei Pulas Odom. This was said specifically when the act hanoitzitz Evan achas min hamizbeach shenemar loy sasun came. It's all about the doing. Not only doing it, but in a way of destruction. Is over move on. It's understood as that also the breaking up that blemish that is impacted in the object, not through the act of the person in a way of destruction, has a connection, and it's similar to the definition of Avodah Zorah, which any amount of Avodah Zorah. So here, any amount is a blemish because it's in the Lashem Lekechal. Even though you're not doing it, it's not hashchos, and it's not you're doing it. Kishem v'der mitzvah fun v'nitatztem es mizbechoisum goymer. Just like the mitzvah of destroying their mizbech, but steht nit nor in Maisa nitzutz von dem Gabra. It's not only the act to destroy that the person, you're making a destruction. It's to accomplish destruction. You want to destroy their mizbech. Al derech says this the same thing is in the prohibition from loy sasen kein Lashem Alekecha. Don't do so. Not only not to do it, the love of Malchus is takav hasiyasado. The love and the prohibition and the lashes will come for doing. But the toichem begeder isur, but the content and the definition of isur is koilel and shoilel jeden eifum for a titzav, and it rejects, negates any way that this stone was knocked out. As yeder zach from mizbeach la Hashem, any part that is a mizbeach la Hashem elikecha, so nit werden nit zu bottle should not be nit zu bottle. So therefore, any amount is no good. So what the Rebbe is basically explaining over here, even though you didn't do it, and that's not a lav, and it's not the issue, but you have accomplished something which blemishes, and the Torah tells you blemish the Avodah Zarah, don't do it to Hashem, would include. So in idea, it's not the lav what it is, but not to create any blemishes, and any blemish, any amount. And the Rebbe says in the bracket, so based on the words of Paneach, the way he teaches, defines, don't do so Hashem Lekecha. The chiyuv thereby is nit nor. The obligation is not only that you're taking away the sanctity from the Evan, that you're removing the sanctity of the stone because you removed it. What happening is that you're disqualifying the Mizbech. Oder es wird a chisorn in der Azorach or in der Chazor. Und al derech zeh, so you're making not only the stone, but you take away the kedusha from the whole Mizbech. After it has been built in the Mizbech. So in the beide protein, side the of course a kedusha from them even. Both that you take out the kedusha of that stone, oisa even pshulam, because it's blemished. Side the bit of a kedusha from mizbech when you get like and you're also taking away the sanctum mizbech. You can be maked with it. And the Rambam sagt in Hilchos Psulam Mikdoshim, Share ein shom mizbeach lizrek olov, v'nemar v'zavacht olov b'sikuno v'lei pogom. There is no Beis HaMikdosh to pray sprinkle. The Torah is zavacht olov should be, and you don't have it because you have a pogom. So you have both. You have a blemish in the stone is possible, but it's not only the stone. The whole mizbech is possible because now you don't have a mizbech, a whole mizbech. ומעין זה, ועל דרך זה, באבני היכל והזורש, נפגוש נפגו, שבלוחה תזבוב. And therefore, any amount that you had would disqualify this bech. So the Rebbe therefore says that's the source of the Rambam, and that's what the Rambam doesn't give a shear in all these cases is because a kosher would also disqualify. So the Rebbe now is going to connect it. Der Inyan von Shiur Pegimos ha'even la'achrei shlach shenivnes b'mizbeach, that idea that we're discussing the amount of how much of the blemish of the stone after the mizbech was built is verbunden euch mit Nomen von the Hilchos Beis HaVelachas Beis HaBchira. And that's also tied to the name, the laws of Beis HaBchira. When we're talking about choosing, then it's a cultural, the Rebbe will explain. Beis HaBchiras is doch als Shem HaMokoim. It's called Beis HaBchira is because this is the place Yivchar Hashem, that Hashem chooses. Und der Rambam is der Mitmadgish, and the Rambam emphasizes, wie gerät schon viel mal, as der Iker Meilus HaMikdosh is dos, was is a Beis HaBchira. The main advantage of the Mikdash is that it's a chosen home. Bechiras HaKodesh Baruch Hu, that the Eibishter chose it. Okay, so it's Bechira. And what is Bechira? Says Yedua, it's known as Emes Bechira is Davke when der Oiskleid von Azach kommt durch Ois mitzad Bechirose HaChofshis von dem Bech. That when is something considered to really be a choice when it comes totally out of the freedom, the free choice of the one who chooses. Nitzuli welches is Meile v'chashiv, not because of any advantage, any importance, was is doing the Dovra Nefchar, which is in the chosen matter. Bechlal nitzuli welches is sibes v'taim netius. Generally, not for any reasons, causes, and tilting, which force the choosing. If you choose something because it has an advantage or you are leaning towards it, then you're not choosing it. Real choice means I chose it without any, otherwise you're not choosing it because then it's there for some reason. So what do you get from this that it's real choice? Two ideas. When a person chooses something because it has an advantage and importance, is moving as the midah v'toike von ihr bechira durchom boicher. So then it's understood that what is the measure, what is the force to choose it? Why is the person, the one who's choosing it, is lois der most von ihr mile chashivas? Then it's according to the measure of its advantage and its support. When the bechira is aber nit mitzad miles hadover. But when the choice is not because of the advantage of the item, nor weil der boicher hat ausgeklippen de Sach, but it's rather, he chose this maybe because free choice, not tied. Is those boifernas is nicht verbunden mit kemide b'shir, then it's in a way, there's no measure. there's no amount. It's always because it's a choice, not dependent on anything. It's just you chose. Base, der Fun ist verstandig, aber du schaust es wird gesorgen in the Dover Nifchar. It's understood if there's lacking, the thing that you chose is ob der Rotzen ubechira von der Sach is zu lieber Meile. So if the reason why you want it and you chose it is because it has an advantage, wenn sich dann in dem Shir, so then it depends auf wie viel der Chesoren is funem in der Meile hanifchar, is poigim in der Meile hanifchar. How much lacking and how much blemishing it is an advantage. If you choose it because the Meile, how much of the Chesoren is there to take away? But if the choosing of the matter comes because of the one who chooses, is that not talking chilik and shirach son? There's no difference. How much? It's not what he chose. Yeah, so both ways, in both sides. If it's because of an important, then it's limited to the importance. And if it's lacking, depends how much is lacking, if it's because of its importance. But if it's in essence, then it's not what you chose. You also understand with regards to the Beis Hamikdash. Since the main advantage is what is a Beis Hamikdash chosen home, the far is a chesoron napagam in bayis. That's why when there's a lacking and there's a blemish in the house, nit verbunden mit ashir. It's not tied to ashir, nor afila mashu chesoron richt on ir iker in yonif Beis Hamikdash. Even any amount touches, it's mean that it's a chosen house. It was chosen, and that's not the same thing. Was der now also sweeten the idea that the above idea at the beginning is bekolshu that the blemishes in any amount is mudgish beikir benegeya lemizbeach. That's emphasized because the difference between the mizbeach after the building and before canal was the Rambam is Mishano zog dem Shir Kadesh Tag Barba Tzipoiden nit wie in Gemorre benegea even achar shenimnes b'mizbeach nor benegea even libinyan hamizbeach. It doesn't say like in the Gemorre about a stone after it was built, which the Gemorre says the Kadesh Chagodes Tag Tzipoiden nor benegea even libinyan hamizbeach. Weil benegele Mizbeach is given abchile miyuchedes. Sai benegele mekoyma the Rambam is madgish. The place was chosen. The Mizbeach, a Mizbeach mekoyma mekurim v'yeser. The place is very accurate. We can never change from this place. Sai benegele Mizbeach gufa, also benegele Mizbeach itself, can mudgish in posuk. This is Mizbach Lo'ila Yisrael. This is Mizbeach for Yisrael. And so that the Eibishter chose this together with the Beis HaBechira, and this should be, doesn't say about the other Kalim, it only says about the Mizbeach. This is the Mizbeach. But the Rambam bringt in Onheib, in Onfein, B'chos Beis HaBechira, bei der Protein from Posig, Zehu Beis Havaya Likim, V'zeh Mizbeach Lo'il Yisrael, so the Mizbeach, so this is Abazunda Diku B'chira Zeh Beneged the Mizbeach. So that emphasizes that, especially by the Mizbeach, the B'chira, it's very important. The Kolshu, that's why the Rambam emphasizes it here, and that's why the change from the Gemara. And it's all because Bechira, even in any amount, is what impacts it. And by the Mizbech, it's more important, the any amount, even more than the rest of them, because the Mizbech has its own choice, its own Bechira. So the Sichos Shabbos Parshas Vorim, Tov Shin Mem.